It all started on a Tuesday afternoon when I was working from home, trying to meet a deadline for a project that was already running late. I live in a small apartment complex, the kind where you recognize your neighbors' faces but don't necessarily know their names. My apartment is on the second floor, with a tiny balcony that overlooks the communal garden area. It's nothing fancy, but it's cozy, and I've made it my own with plants, art prints, and a collection of mismatched furniture that somehow works together. I'd been living there for about 8 months when I first noticed him, the guy from apartment 4C. He moved in about 3 months after I did, and I couldn't help but notice him right away. He was tall, with dark hair that always looked slightly messy, as if he'd just run his fingers through it. He had this easy confidence about him, the kind that draws your attention without trying. We'd exchanged polite nods in the hallway and brief hellos when collecting mail, but never anything beyond that. I knew he was straight, not because he ever explicitly said so, but because of the parade of women I occasionally saw coming and going from his apartment. Plus, he had that typical straight guy energy, sports jerseys on weekends, a complete lack of awareness about how good-looking he was, and that particular obliviousness to the small details that I tend to notice. His name was Ryan, according to the mailbox labels, and he seemed nice enough in those brief interactions. That Tuesday, I was deep in my work when I heard a knock at my door. It was unusual enough to startle me. I rarely got visitors, especially unannounced ones. When I opened the door, there he was, Ryan from 4C, looking slightly apologetic with his phone in hand. "Hey, sorry to bother you," he said, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "My charger broke, and I've got an important call in about 20 minutes. Any chance you have an iPhone charger I could borrow?" He looked different up close. I could see the flecks of gold in his hazel eyes and the slight stubble along his jawline. He was wearing a simple gray t-shirt that fit him just right and dark jeans. There was something disarming about the way he looked at me directly, with a slight smile that suggested both confidence and vulnerability. I hesitated for a moment, not because I didn't want to help him, but because I was surprised by the request. We'd never really spoken beyond basic pleasantries, and now he was at my door asking to borrow something. It felt like crossing some invisible neighbor boundary. "Yeah, sure," I finally replied, stepping back to let him in. "Come in. I've got one somewhere." My apartment wasn't exactly messy, but it wasn't visitor-ready either. There were papers scattered across my coffee table, a half-empty mug of cold coffee, and my laptop open with spreadsheets displayed on the screen. I quickly moved some things aside, suddenly self-conscious about the state of my place. "Thanks, man. You're a lifesaver," Ryan said, stepping inside but hovering near the door, as if unsure whether to come in fully or wait in the threshold. "I've got this call with a potential client, and my phone's at 2%. Of all days for my charger to stop working." I rummaged through my drawer where I kept various cables and electronics. "What kind of work do you do?" I asked, trying to make conversation while searching for the charger. "I'm a freelance graphic designer," he replied. "Mostly branding work for small businesses." "What about you?" "Data analyst," I said, finally finding the charger. "Not as creative as your job, but I like working with numbers." I handed him the charger, and our fingers brushed briefly. It was nothing, just a momentary contact, but I noticed it. He probably didn't. "Actually," he said, looking at his phone, "would it be okay if I stayed for a minute while this charges a bit? Just enough to get through the call if it goes long. I promise I won't be in your way." That's when things got interesting. I hadn't expected him to ask to stay, and I wasn't prepared for the small flutter of nervousness I felt. It wasn't that I was uncomfortable with him being there. It was more that I suddenly became hyper-aware of myself, my space, and the fact that this attractive straight neighbor was now standing in my living room. "Sure, no problem," I said, trying to sound casual. "Make yourself comfortable. Can I get you something to drink? Water? Coffee?" "Water would be great. Thanks," he said, finally moving further into the apartment. He glanced around, taking in the space. "You've got a nice place. I like what you've done with it." I went to the kitchen to get him a glass of water, grateful for the moment to compose myself. When I returned, he had settled on the edge of my sofa, his phone plugged in on the side table. He looked more relaxed now, less like someone who had just needed a favor and more like someone visiting a friend. "Thanks," he said, taking the water. "So, how long have you been in the building? I feel like I've seen you around, but we've never really talked." "About 8 months," I replied, sitting in the armchair across from him. You moved in a few months after me, right? He nodded. Yeah, about 5 months ago. Needed a change after a breakup. You know how it is. And just like that, the conversation began to flow. What I had expected to be an awkward few minutes of small talk, while his phone charged, turned into something much more interesting. We talked about the building, complaining good-naturedly about the temperamental elevator and the mysterious neighbor on the first floor who seemed to cook fish at 7 a.m. every Sunday. So what happened with your charger? I asked after a while. He laughed, running a hand through his hair in a way that was unfairly attractive. Honestly, my cat happened. She's got this thing for cables. I've lost 3 chargers in the last month alone. You have a cat? I asked, surprised. I hadn't pegged him as a cat person. Yeah, Luna. She's a little terror, but I love her. Do you have any pets? I shook my head. My lease doesn't allow them, technically. I think the landlord makes exceptions, but I travel too much for work to have one right now. Where do you travel to? He asked, seeming genuinely interested. And so our conversation continued, moving from pets to travel to favorite places we'd visited. I told him about my trip to Japan last year, and he shared stories about backpacking through Europe after college. It was strange how easily we fell into conversation, given that we'd barely acknowledged each other's existence before this. What struck me most was how attentive he was. When I spoke, he listened, really listened, with his body turned toward me, occasionally asking follow-up questions that showed he was engaged with what I was saying. It was a quality I found surprisingly attractive, especially since my dating experiences had often involved men who seemed more interested in talking about themselves. As we talked, I couldn't help but notice little things about him. The way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, how he gestured with his hands when explaining something he was passionate about, the small scar above his right eyebrow that I hadn't noticed before. How'd you get that scar? I asked during a lull in the conversation. He touched it reflexively, a small smile playing on his lips. Skateboarding accident when I was 15. Thought I was Tony Hawk. Turned out I was just a kid with poor coordination and too much confidence. I laughed, and he joined in, the sound warm and genuine. There was something disarming about his self-deprecating humor, the way he didn't take himself too seriously. The minutes stretched on, and I realized with surprise that we'd been talking for almost half an hour. His phone had charged enough, but neither of us had mentioned it. It was as if we'd both forgotten the reason he was there in the first place. Oh shit, he said suddenly, glancing at his watch. My call. I completely lost track of time. Is it too late? I asked, feeling a twinge of guilt for distracting him. He checked his phone. No, I've still got a few minutes. But I should probably head back to my place to prepare. He unplugged his phone, the charger dangling from his hand. Thanks for this, and for the conversation. It was nice to finally properly meet you. Likewise, I said, standing as he did. Good luck with your call. He paused at the door, turning back to me. Hey, I'm having a few friends over on Friday night. Nothing fancy, just drinks and maybe some games. You should come by if you're free. Apartment 4C, around 8. The invitation caught me off guard. Was this just politeness, a way to thank me for the charger? Or was it genuine interest in continuing our unexpected connection? Yeah, that sounds good. I heard myself saying before I could overthink it. I'll stop by. Great, he said, with that easy smile that seemed to light up his face. See you then. And just like that, he was gone, leaving me standing in my doorway, wondering what had just happened. What had started as a simple request for a charger had somehow turned into the most interesting conversation I'd had in weeks, and now an invitation to socialize further. I closed the door and leaned against it, trying to process the last half hour. I wasn't naive. I knew he was straight, and I wasn't reading anything romantic into our interaction. But there was something about the ease of our conversation, the natural flow of it, that had been unexpected and refreshing. For the rest of the day, I found myself replaying our conversation in my mind, remembering details he'd shared about his life and wondering what his friends would be like. Would I fit in with his crowd? Would it be awkward? Part of me was tempted to make an excuse not to go, to retreat back into the safety of our polite neighbor-nodding relationship. But another part of me was curious about Ryan from 4C who had a cat named Luna and a scar from a skateboarding accident, who listened attentively and laughed easily. The next couple of days passed without any further interaction. I saw him once in the parking lot as I was leaving for work, and we exchanged waves, but that was it. I wondered if he regretted inviting me. if it had been a spur-of-the-moment courtesy that he now wished he could take back. But then on Thursday evening, I ran into him in the hallway as I was coming home with groceries. "Hey," he said, his face lighting up with recognition. "Still on for tomorrow night?" The fact that he brought it up first eased my concerns. "Yeah, definitely," I replied, juggling my grocery bags. "Looking forward to it." "Cool. Can I help you with those?" he offered, gesturing to my bags. "I've got it, but thanks," I said, not wanting to impose. "See you tomorrow." He nodded and continued on his way, and I couldn't help but notice a spring in my step as I unlocked my door. It was nice to be included, to be seen as more than just the guy in apartment 2B. Friday evening arrived, and I found myself standing in front of my closet, overthinking what to wear. It was ridiculous. This wasn't a date, just a casual get-together with neighbors. I finally settled on a simple blue button-up and jeans, casual but put together. At 8 o'clock, I made my way to apartment 4C, a bottle of wine in hand. I could hear music and laughter from inside as I approached. For a moment, I hesitated, that familiar social anxiety creeping in. What if his friends didn't like me? What if the easy conversation we'd shared didn't translate to a group setting? But before I could spiral further, I knocked. Ryan opened the door, his face breaking into a warm smile when he saw me. "You made it," he said, stepping aside to let me in. "Come on in, everyone's just getting settled." His apartment was similar to mine in layout, but felt completely different. Where my place was filled with books and plants, his had a minimalist vibe with clean lines and neutral colors, punctuated by striking pieces of art on the walls. His own work, I assumed, given his profession. There were about 6 other people there, a mix of men and women, all around our age. Ryan introduced me to everyone, his hand lightly resting on my shoulder as he did so. "This is my neighbor who saved me with a charger the other day," he explained, and everyone laughed. "So you're the charger guy?" said one of the women, raising her glass in my direction. Ryan wouldn't stop talking about how you two had this great conversation. I glanced at Ryan, surprised. He'd been talking about me? What can I say? "It's rare to find someone who's actually interesting to talk to," Ryan said with a shrug. But there was something in his expression I couldn't quite read. The evening progressed, and to my relief, I found myself enjoying the company. Ryan's friends were a diverse group, some from his work, others from college, a couple from his gym. They were welcoming and easy to talk to, and I soon felt myself relaxing into the conversation. What I found most interesting, though, was watching Ryan in his element. He was attentive to everyone, making sure drinks were refilled and everyone was included in conversations. But I noticed that he kept finding his way back to where I was, asking my opinion on topics, laughing at my jokes, making sure I was comfortable. At one point, we ended up in the kitchen together, away from the others. He was grabbing more ice, and I was helping carry drinks back to the living room. "I'm glad you came," he said, his voice lower than it had been all evening. "I wasn't sure if you would." "Why wouldn't I?" I asked, curious about his uncertainty. He shrugged, focusing intently on the ice tray. "I don't know. Sometimes people say yes just to be polite. I'm not that polite," I joked, which earned me a laugh. "No, you're not," he agreed, looking up at me with those hazel eyes. "That's what I like about you. You're real." There was a moment then, a pause in the conversation that felt charged with something I couldn't name. We were standing close, closer than was strictly necessary in the spacious kitchen. I could smell his cologne, something woodsy and subtle. For a wild, irrational second, I thought he might be about to say something more, do something more. But then one of his friends called from the living room, breaking the moment. "We should get back," he said, picking up the ice bucket. But he hesitated, as if there was something else he wanted to say. In the end, he just smiled and led the way back to the group. The rest of the evening was fun but uneventful. We played some games, had more drinks, shared stories. It was around midnight when people started to leave. I helped clean up a bit, despite Ryan's protest that I didn't need to. "It's the least I can do," I insisted, gathering empty bottles. "You invited me, fed me, introduced me to your friends. Well, when you put it that way, maybe I should have you clean the bathroom too," he joked, but his smile was warm. Once everything was tidied up, I knew it was time to go. We stood at his door, that strange moment from the kitchen lingering unspoken between us. "Thanks for tonight," I said. "I had a really good time." "Me too," he replied. "We should hang out again sometime. Not just when my charger breaks." I'd like that, I said, meaning it. There was that pause again, that moment of hesitation. Then he reached out and gave me a quick hug, the kind guys give each other, with a pat on the back. It was friendly, nothing more. But as I walked back to my apartment, I couldn't help but analyze it, turning it over in my mind. The thing is, I'm not the kind of person who falls for straight guys. I've been there, done that, learned my lesson. But there was something about Ryan that intrigued me, something beyond his obvious good looks. It was the way he listened, the way he seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me, the way he'd apparently talked about me to his friends. Over the next few weeks, our relationship evolved. We started texting occasionally, just casual things at first, like recommendations for a good takeout place or complaints about the building's maintenance issues. Then it became more regular, sharing funny things that happened during our days or articles we thought the other might find interesting. We started hanging out too, sometimes with his friends, but often just the two of us. We'd watch a game at his place or grab dinner at the local pub. It was friendship, plain and simple, but there was an ease to it that I hadn't expected. One evening, about a month after the charger incident, we were at my place watching a movie. Luna, his cat, had taken a liking to me and was curled up in my lap, purring contentedly. Ryan had brought over pizza and beer, and we were comfortable on my sofa, the movie playing on my laptop. "Can I ask you something?" Ryan said during a quiet moment in the film. "Sure," I replied, absently stroking Luna's fur. He seemed to consider his words carefully. "Have you been seeing anyone lately? Dating, I mean." The question caught me off guard. We'd never really discussed our dating lives before, beyond his casual mention of a breakup when we first talked. "Not really," I said honestly. "Work's been busy, and I haven't met anyone interesting in a while. What about you?" He shrugged, his eyes on the screen. "Same, I guess. There was someone I was interested in, but I'm not sure if they feel the same way." "Oh," I said, trying to sound casual while ignoring the small pang I felt. "Anyone I know?" He was quiet for a moment, then turned to look at me directly. "Yeah, actually. You do." My mind raced through the possibilities. One of his friends from the party? Someone in our building? But before I could ask, he continued. "It's complicated," he said, his voice lower now. "I've never felt this way about a guy before." The words hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. I froze, not sure if I was interpreting them correctly, not sure if I was projecting my own feelings onto an innocent statement. "What are you saying?" I asked finally, my heart pounding. He ran a hand through his hair, that familiar gesture that I'd come to find so endearing. "I'm saying that I like you, as more than just a neighbor or a friend. And I have no idea what to do about it, because I've never been attracted to a man before, and I don't know if you feel the same way, and I'm probably ruining everything by telling you this." I stared at him, trying to process his words. Ryan, who I'd been convinced was straight, was sitting on my sofa telling me he had feelings for me. It seemed impossible, like something out of a daydream I might have had but never allowed myself to take seriously. "Say something," he urged when I remained silent. "I thought you were straight," was all I could manage. He laughed, but it was tinged with nervousness. "Yeah, so did I. Until you opened your door that day and let me borrow your charger. And stayed for a minute," I added, a smile starting to form. "Best minute of my life," he said softly. I looked at him then, really looked at him. The guy I'd been getting to know over the past month, the guy who listened and laughed and cared, the guy who was now looking at me with a vulnerability that made my heart ache. "I like you too," I admitted. "I have for a while, but I never thought that I could feel the same way," he finished for me. I nodded. "Neither did I," he said. But here we are. Luna chose that moment to jump off my lap, as if sensing the shift in the atmosphere. In her absence, the space between Ryan and me seemed to shrink. He moved closer, hesitantly, giving me time to pull away if I wanted to. I didn't. When his lips met mine, it was gentle, questioning. A first kiss that asked permission, that tested waters. I kissed him back, equally gentle, equally unsure. When we pulled apart, there was wonder in his eyes, as if he'd discovered something precious and unexpected. "Was that okay?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "More than okay," I assured him, my hand finding his. We didn't watch the rest of the movie. Instead, we talked about what this meant, about his feelings, about mine. He told me how confused he'd been at first, how he'd tried to convince himself it was just friendship he felt. I told him about my own hesitations, my fear of reading too much into his attention. It wasn't a simple conversation. There were complications to consider, questions without easy answers. But as we talked into the night, one thing became clear. Whatever was happening between us was worth exploring, worth the uncertainty and the potential challenges. When he finally left my apartment that night, it was with a promise to take things slowly, to figure it out together. As I closed the door behind him, I couldn't help but smile at the thought of how it had all started, with a straight neighbor asking for a charger and a minute to stay. Sometimes, it's the smallest moments that change everything. A broken charger, a knock on a door, a conversation that stretches from minutes to hours. I don't know what will happen with Ryan and me, whether this unexpected connection will grow into something lasting or fade with time. But I do know that I'm grateful for that Tuesday afternoon when he needed a charger, and for every moment since. Life has a funny way of surprising you when you least expect it. Sometimes, all it takes is opening your door to possibility, and maybe lending a charger to a neighbor who needs to stay for just a minute. Total _char_count. 18,563.